On the night of May 7th, 1816, they murdered an entire civilization, not with guns, not with war, but with something far more sinister. This is what remained 48 hours later. The same thing happened in Boston, New York, Chicago, St. Louis. Over 1,000 cities in the same week. Thousands of these magnificent palaces, reduced to ash and buried under 30 feet of mud. But here's what they really don't want you to know. Those orphans they shipped across America, they weren't orphans. They were survivors. And the people running those orphanages knew exactly who their parents were. Comment below where you're watching from, and tell me honestly, have you ever heard this story in any history class? Any documentary? Anywhere? Exactly. Because if you knew the truth, you'd ask the one question that destroys their entire narrative. How did people using horse and buggy build structures that we can't replicate today with cranes, computers, and billion-dollar budgets? They didn't. Someone else did. A civilization so advanced, they didn't need electricity, because the buildings themselves were the power source. The real reason they invented the insane asylum, what they found in the basement of these buildings, the patent that was seized in 1908 that could have changed everything. But I need you to do something first. Subscribe right now, because videos like this don't stay up for long. And when you see what I found buried in your city's historical records, you'll understand why they tried so hard to erase this. Look at this map. It's from 1754, sitting right now in the British Library, and there's something on it that shouldn't exist. Right there, spanning nearly half the known world, from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe, Tartary, not Tartaria, Tartary, the largest empire you've never heard of. And here's what makes my blood run cold. Every single map from the 1600s through the 1800s shows it. French maps, Dutch maps, Russian maps, American maps, they all marked it. Grand Tartary, Independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary. It's right there, bigger than Rome at its peak, larger than the Mongol Empire, more vast than anything we're taught existed. Then suddenly, around 1850, it just vanishes, completely scrubbed from every new map printed, every geography book, every historical record. You want to know what they replaced it with? Nothing. Literally blank spaces on maps, unexplored territories. As if millions of people, thousands of cities, and an empire that lasted centuries just evaporated overnight. But the buildings didn't evaporate. I want you to imagine something with me. It's 1870. There's no electricity in homes, no power tools, no cranes, no concrete mixers. The most advanced technology available is a steam engine and a pulley system. Now look at this building, the Pennsylvania State Capitol, built in 1906, they claim, by workers making $3 a day, using hand tools and horse-drawn carts. The dome alone weighs 52 million pounds. The interior has hand-carved marble imported from Italy, bronze fixtures cast with details so intricate you need a magnifying glass to see them, murals painted across 30-foot ceilings, and a grand staircase made from stones that each weigh over 2 tons. The official story says they built this in 4 years. For years. I called a modern construction company last month. I asked them how long it would take to build something like this today, with all our technology. They laughed. They said it couldn't be done. Not in 4 years. Not in 10. The craftsmanship alone would take decades, even if you had unlimited money. So either the official history is lying about when these buildings were constructed, or the people who built them had capabilities we've completely lost. Now here's where it gets interesting. Check the basements of these buildings. Actually go look at them if you're in one of these cities. The windows that are supposed to be on the first floor, they're half buried underground. The grand entrances, they're at what used to be the second-story level. It's like the entire ground level of these cities was buried under 15, 20, sometimes 30 feet of mud and debris. And instead of excavating, they just built on top of it. They call it raising the street level. They say it was for better drainage, or to prevent flooding. But that explanation falls apart when you realize this happened in hundreds of cities across multiple continents, all around the same time period at 8. Walk through downtown San Francisco, Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago. Those structures they call Gilded Age mansions, they're still standing. And when you actually look at them, when you really see them, something doesn't add up. I want you to imagine something with me. It's 1870. There's no electricity in homes, no power tools, no cranes, no concrete mixers. The most advanced technology available is a steam engine and a pulley system. Now look at this building. The Pennsylvania State Capitol, built in 1906, they claim, by workers making $3 a day, using hand tools and horse-drawn carts. The dome alone weighs 52 million pounds. The interior has hand-carved marble imported from Italy, bronze fixtures cast with details so intricate you need a magnifying glass to see them, murals painted across 30-foot ceilings, and a grand staircase made from stones that each weigh over 2 tons. The official story says they built this in 4 years. For years. I called a modern construction company last month. I asked them how long it would take to build something like this today, with all our technology. They laughed. They said it couldn't be done. Not in 4 years. Not in 10. The craftsmanship alone would take decades, even if you had unlimited money. So either the official history is lying about when these buildings were constructed, or the people who built them had capabilities we've completely lost. Now here's where it gets interesting. Check the basements of these buildings. Actually go look at them if you're in one of these cities. The windows that are supposed to be on the first floor, they're half buried underground. The grand entrances, they're at what used to be the second-story level. It's like the entire ground level of these cities was buried under 15, 20, sometimes 30 feet of mud and debris. And instead of excavating, they just built on top of it. They call it raising the street level. They say it was for better drainage, or to prevent flooding. But that explanation falls apart when you realize this happened in hundreds of cities across multiple continents, all around the same time period. But here's what they really don't want you examining too closely. Those domes, those spires, those ornamental metal fixtures running up the sides of every important building from that era. They weren't decorative. Look at the pattern. Every government building, every courthouse, every grand exhibition hall, they all have the same design. A central dome, spires with metal caps, intricate metalwork running along the roof lines. And here's the detail nobody talks about. They're all positioned at very specific heights, following very specific mathematical ratios. There's a reason for that. In 1893, they held the Chicago World's Fair. The official story says they built an entire city of massive, ornate buildings in less than 2 years, which they called the White City. Over 200 buildings. Then they demolished all of it right after the fair ended. But before they tore it down, something impossible happened. They lit up the entire fairground with electric lights. Tens of thousands of them, powered by something they called alternating current, which supposedly had just been invented by Tesla and Westinghouse. Here's the problem. The amount of copper wiring, the generators needed, the infrastructure required to power that many lights. It doesn't match the technology they claim to have had. The official photographs show these lights everywhere, on every building, illuminating fountains, walkways, exhibits. And then when the fair ended, they burned it all, every building. They said it was temporary construction, just plaster and wood frames. But the photographs show stone foundations, metal frameworks, architectural details that don't match that story. Why build something that elaborate just to destroy it 6 months later? Unless they weren't really building it. Unless they were showcasing it. Showing people what this technology could do before they buried it forever. Now, let me show you something they buried even deeper than those first floor windows. Between 1811 and 1817, something happened that changed everything. They call them the Great Fires. Major cities across America and Europe, all experiencing devastating fires within a few years of each other. New York, 1811. St. Petersburg, 1812. Moscow, 1812. Washington, D.C., 1814. The entire city burned. London, 1814. Hamburg, 1842. Pittsburgh, 1845. San Francisco, 1851. The pattern repeats across dozens of cities. Massive fires, massive destruction, And after each fire, during the rebuilding, they found something underground. Structures that weren't supposed to be there. Buildings buried so deep they couldn't have been from any recent civilization. And right after these fires, something else started happening. Orphanages. Hundreds of them. Thousands of children with no records, no parents, no history. Just appearing in cities across the country. They called it the Orphan Train Movement. Between 1854 and 1929, they shipped over 200,000 children to the Midwest. Children they claimed were orphans from the overcrowded cities. But here's what the records don't explain. Why were there suddenly so many orphans? Where did their parents go? And why do none of these children have birth certificates or any documentation before the age of 5 or 6? Because what happened in those years between 1811 and 1820 wasn't a series of unfortunate fires. It was a reset, and the children, they were the only witnesses left alive. They called it the year without a summer, but that name doesn't even begin to capture what actually happened. My grandmother used to tell me about stories her grandmother told her, stories about the year the sun disappeared, about snow falling in July, about crops freezing in the fields in the middle of August. I thought they were just old family legends, the kind of tales that get exaggerated over generations. Then I found the records. June 6, 1816, Quebec City, Canada, 8 inches of snow. In June, July 4th, 1816, Savannah, Georgia, ice forming on water barrels, frost killing every crop for hundreds of miles. August 20th, 1816, Connecticut, farmers recording temperatures below freezing. Entire harvest destroyed overnight. This wasn't just happening in America. The same reports came from England, from France, from China, from places that had never experienced anything like this in recorded history. But here's what the history books don't tell you. They blame it all on a volcano. Mount Tambora in Indonesia erupted in 1815. They say the ash cloud circled the globe and blocked out the sun. One volcano, one eruption, and somehow it created a global catastrophe that lasted for years? I'm not buying it, because the really strange reports, the ones they buried in local newspapers and personal journals, they don't talk about volcanic ash. They talk about mud, rivers of it, waves of it, mud that appeared out of nowhere and swallowed entire neighborhoods in a single night. There's a newspaper archive in Philadelphia. Most has been digitized now, but there are sections they never uploaded. I had to request physical access to see them. May 1816, a merchant named Thomas Wickham wrote a letter to his brother in Boston. He describes waking up to find his first floor completely submerged, not in water, in mud, thick, dense mud that had poured to the streets overnight. He wrote that his neighbors were digging out their ground floor windows, that the entire street level had risen by 12 feet, that buildings which once had steps leading up to their entrances were now accessible by walking straight in from the new street level. And here's the thing that made me put the letter down and just stare at the wall. He wrote that this was happening everywhere, that travelers coming from New York reported the same thing, from Baltimore, from Richmond, cities waking up to find their foundations buried. They tried to excavate at first. There are records of work crews attempting to dig out the original street levels. But then the orders came down. Stop digging. Fill in the old levels. Build on top. Why? What were they afraid people would find if they kept digging? Because I found something in the municipal records from 1817. A work order for the demolition of subsurface structures of unknown origin. Not old buildings. Unknown origin. They found something down there they couldn't explain, and instead of investigating, they buried it deeper. And it happened in every major city. The same year, the same mysterious mud, the same order to stop excavating and build over it. You can still see the evidence today. Go to Seattle, Portland, Cincinnati. Look for the underground tours they offer. The old city buried beneath the current one. They'll tell you it was for drainage, for preventing floods, for modernization. But walk through those buried streets. Look at the craftsmanship in those underground buildings, the architecture, the quality of construction. Does that look like something people abandoned because of poor drainage? Now let me tell you about Emma. She was 7 years old when they found her in 1854, standing alone at a train station in Illinois, with no memory of how she got there, no parents, no family, no name, until the orphanage workers gave her one. The records say she was one of hundreds of children arriving that year. Thousands, if you count all the orphanages across the Midwest. Children who appeared out of nowhere, with no documentation, no birth records, no history. They called it the Orphan Train Movement. Started in 1854, ran until 1929. The official story says they were rescuing poor urban children from overcrowded cities and giving them new lives on farms. But I found something in the church records that doesn't match that story. A priest in Iowa kept detailed journals. In 1856, he wrote about interviewing children from the orphan trains. He asked them about their parents, about where they came from, and what disturbed him was how many of them described the same thing. They remembered living in grand houses with many rooms, with beautiful fixtures, with grounds and gardens. They remembered their parents being educated, wealthy even, and then they remembered fire, chaos, being separated from their families, waking up in institutional buildings where everyone told them their memories were wrong, that they'd always been orphans, that their parents had never existed. The priest wrote that these children were too young to fabricate such consistent stories, that something had happened to them, something that had torn them from their families. But when he tried to report this to church authorities, he was told to stop asking questions. His journal entries end abruptly in 1857. Between 1850 and 1880, over 300 new asylums opened across America. Not hospitals for the physically ill, asylums for people they claimed were mentally unstable. And you want to know what the admission records show? A huge percentage of these patients had one thing in common. They kept insisting they'd lived in magnificent buildings that no longer existed. They kept describing technology that couldn't possibly have existed. They kept talking about a different world that had vanished. So they locked them away, drugged them, silenced them, because if people believed what these witnesses were saying, the entire official narrative would collapse. October 8, 1871. Chicago. The official story says a cow kicked over a lantern, started a fire that burned for 3 days and destroyed over 3 square miles of city. But here's what the fire department records show. The fire started in multiple locations simultaneously, separated by miles, all within the same hour. One cow, multiple fires, miles apart. The Chicago fire wasn't an accident. It was systematic, and it wasn't the only one. Boston, massive fire destroys a commercial district. Official cause? A spark from a steam boiler. Baltimore, fire consumes 70 city blocks. Official cause? Cigarette in a warehouse. San Francisco, earthquake and subsequent fires destroy 80% of the city. Official cause? Natural disaster. But look at what these fires destroyed. Not the new construction, not the simple wooden buildings. They somehow managed to completely consume the grandest, most elaborate structures in each city. The buildings with the ornate domes, the massive stone edifices, the architectural masterpieces that couldn't be explained by the official timeline. I found insurance records from after the San Francisco fire. Buildings that were supposedly made of wood and plaster. According to the official narrative, the insurance companies listed them as solid stone and steel. Buildings that should have taken decades to construct were listed as being built in under 2 years. The insurance companies weren't buying the official story. They knew something didn't add up, but they paid out the claims anyway and stayed quiet, because the alternative was admitting that the history everyone had been taught was a lie. After each fire, you know what they built in place of these magnificent structures? Practical buildings, simple buildings. Modern buildings with no architectural flourishes, no mysterious energy systems, no connection to anything that came before. They weren't rebuilding cities. They were erasing evidence. And the few grand buildings they couldn't destroy with fire, they found another use for them. May 1st, 1893. Chicago. 27 million people visited the world's Columbian Exposition that year. They walked through what newspapers called the White City. Over 200 buildings sprawling across 600 acres. Palaces made of what they claimed was staff, a mixture of plaster and fiber. I've spent 3 years studying the construction records for that fair, and nothing adds up. The official timeline says they built the entire exposition in 2 years. 2 years to construct buildings that rivaled European cathedrals in scale and detail. Buildings with working fountains, electrical systems lighting up 120,000 bulbs, elevated railways, a Ferris wheel that stood 264 feet tall, using horses and hand tools. I found a letter from an engineer named Elias Warner. He was part of the original survey team. He wrote to his wife in March of 1891. 2 years before the fair opened, he described arriving at the site and finding structures already there, not empty land, structures. He wrote that he was told to incorporate these existing buildings into the plan, to make it look like they were new construction. He wrote that the buildings were unlike anything he'd seen in American architecture, more elaborate than anything being built in Europe, with technical features he couldn't explain. His letter stopped in April 1891. After the fair closed in October 1893, they burned it, all of it. The official story claims these were temporary structures, always meant to be destroyed. But look at the photographs. Look at the foundations visible in the demolition photos. Those aren't temporary structures. Those are permanent buildings being systematically demolished. And here's what really keeps me up at night. The same pattern repeated at every major World's Fair. Paris, 1900. Buffalo, 1901. St. Louis, 1904. San Francisco, 1915. Massive, elaborate buildings constructed in impossibly short time frames, then destroyed immediately after the exhibitions ended. They weren't building these structures. They were showcasing what was already there, then erasing it before too many people started asking the right questions. D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, Cornelius Vanderbilt were taught these men built America, that they were self-made titans who created vast fortunes through innovation and hard work. But look at the timeline. Rockefeller was born in 1839. By 1870, he controlled 90% of America's oil refineries. 31 years old, from a traveling salesman's son to controlling an entire industry. Carnegie arrived in America in 1848 with nothing. By 1889, he owned the largest steel company in the world. J.P. Morgan's father was a merchant. By 1895, Morgan was restructuring entire railroads, controlling banks, dictating American financial policy. That's not how wealth accumulation works. Not in a single generation. Not without something already there to take control of. I found something in the Library of Congress that changed how I see these men. Property records from the 1850s and 60s. Massive real estate transfers. Hundreds of properties, industrial facilities, infrastructure networks, all changing hands from entities listed as dissolved corporations or liquidated trusts. And who bought them? The robber barons. For fractions of what these properties should have been worth. It's like they were buying the remnants of something that had just collapsed. Not building empires from scratch, but acquiring the pieces of one that had just fallen. Now think about J.P. Morgan and Nikola Tesla. Tesla discovered how to transmit electricity wirelessly in the 1890s. He was building a tower that would have provided free electricity to anyone within a certain radius. Morgan funded Tesla's early work. Then, when Tesla revealed what he was actually building, Morgan cut off all funding. Tesla's tower was demolished in 1917. Morgan's explanation? He couldn't put a meter on free energy. Couldn't charge people for something they could access for free. But what if Morgan already knew about free energy? What if that's exactly what those Tartarian buildings had been providing? And Morgan wasn't trying to suppress a new invention. He was making sure an old technology stayed buried. The Smithsonian Institution opens in Washington, D.C. The official purpose? To increase and diffuse knowledge, to preserve American history. But look at what the Smithsonian actually did in its first 50 years. They collected artifacts from across America, indigenous remains, giant skeletons that frontier settlers kept reporting, Advanced tools that didn't match the accepted timeline. Structures and objects that predated accepted history. And then these artifacts disappeared into the archives. Never displayed. Never studied publicly. Just cataloged and locked away. There's a researcher named Jim Vieira who spent 20 years tracking down newspaper reports of giant skeleton discoveries from the 1800s. He found over 1,500 counts. Skeletons 7, 8, even 10 feet tall. Discovered during construction projects, farming excavations, mining operations. Every single report mentions the same thing. The Smithsonian was contacted. The Smithsonian collected the remains. And after that, nothing. No records. No displays. No scientific papers. The Smithsonian's official position? These newspaper reports were all hoaxes or misidentifications. All 1,500 of them. Right around the same time, something else was happening. Education was being standardized. Before 1850, there were hundreds of different textbook publishers, each with different versions of history, different timelines, different narratives about American origins. Then the Board of Education was formed. A standard curriculum was established. And suddenly, there was one official version of history, one timeline everyone had to teach, one narrative that erased everything that came before 1776. I found copies of pre-1850 textbooks in a university archive. They tell completely different stories. They reference civilizations in North America that supposedly never existed. They describe advanced cities where official history claims there were only wilderness and native tribes. And all of these alternative textbooks were removed from circulation by 1870. One history, one story. No alternatives allowed. But they made one mistake. Maps. You can't destroy every map ever printed. Too many copies. Too many collections. Too many private libraries. I have 3 maps in front of me right now. All from reputable sources, all from major cartographers. Produced by the Royal Geographic Society in London, shows Grand Tartary spanning from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean, clearly labeled, clearly defined borders, trade routes marked through it, J.H. Young's Map of Asia. Same region. Tartary's still there, still massive, still detailed. Mitchell's New General Atlas. Same region. No Tartary. The entire space is labeled as various Chinese provinces, Russian territories, unexplored regions, as if an empire the size of Russia had just evaporated in 40 years. Not collapsed, not conquered, just erased from the maps as if it never existed. And this is still happening. 2 years ago, I tried editing information about Tartary into a Wikipedia article about Central Asian history. I cited the historical maps. I referenced the cartographic evidence. I used academic sources from before 1900. The edit was removed within 6 hours. Flagged as conspiracy theory. User banned from editing. I created a new account. Tried again with different sources. Same result. Whatever happened between 1811 and 1850, whoever orchestrated it, they're still controlling the narrative, still suppressing the evidence. Still making sure that the empire that once covered half the world remains nothing more than a footnote in forgotten maps. And that should terrify you, because if they erase something that massive from history, what else aren't they telling us? 3 weeks ago, they demolished the Old Monroe County Courthouse in Rochester, New York, built in 1896. Massive stone structure, ornate dome, detailed metalwork running along the roofline. The kind of craftsmanship you don't see anymore. The official reason? Structural concerns. Too expensive to maintain. More cost-effective to build something modern. But I talked to the demolition crew. One of them sent me photos they took before they tore it down. The foundation was solid. The stonework was intact. The structure wasn't failing. It was being eliminated. And Rochester isn't unique. Penn Station in New York, demolished 1963. Replaced with Madison Square Garden, one of the most beautiful buildings in America, destroyed to build a sports arena. Chicago's Federal Building, demolished 1965. Another massive structure with impossible details. Gone. Detroit's Old City Hall, built 1871. Survived over a century. Demolished 1961. I've been tracking these demolitions for 5 years. I have a database now. Over 400 significant old world buildings destroyed in America since 1950. Not damaged by disasters. Not condemned due to actual structural failure. Demolished by choice. And they all share the same features. Domes. Elaborate facades. Symmetrical design. Ornamental metalwork. Construction dates between 1850 and 1920. The pattern is undeniable once you see it. But here's what really got my attention. Last year, a preservation group in Philadelphia tried to save a Divine Lorraine Hotel. Built 1894. Massive structure with one of those distinctive domes. They raised money, filed petitions, got community support. The city council voted to demolish it anyway. Despite the funding for restoration, despite public opposition, I obtained the council meeting transcripts through a Freedom of Information request. And buried in there, one council member said something revealing. He said the building represented architectural elements inconsistent with modern historical narrative. Not unsafe, not unrepairable. Inconsistent with the narrative. They're still erasing evidence. Right now, in cities across America, you can take a tour in Seattle. They call it the Seattle Underground Tour. You walk through the original street level of the city, now buried 1 to 3 stories below the current streets. The tour guides have a prepared explanation. After the Great Seattle Fire of 1889, they raised the street level to improve drainage. The old storefronts became basements. Very practical, very logical. But walk through those underground passages and actually look at what you're seeing. These aren't crude frontier buildings. The craftsmanship is exceptional. Carved stone, detailed tile work, archways with precision cuts, street lamps that are still functional after being buried for over a century. One of the underground buildings has a bathroom with plumbing that the tour guide can't explain. The pipes are made from material that doesn't match any known 1880s manufacturing. The fixtures are too advanced for the era. When I asked about it, the guide said it must have been renovated at some point. But the building has been sealed underground since 1907. Nobody renovated anything. Portland has underground tunnels. Chicago has entire buried neighborhoods. Cincinnati has a network of subsurface streets and buildings. Rome, Paris, London, every old city has these layers of buried construction. And the official explanation is always the same. Flooding, drainage, modernization. But I found city planning documents from Cincinnati in 1867. They describe finding existing subsurface structures of unknown origin during excavation work. The documents note that these structures extended far deeper than the work crews were prepared for. The recommendation? Stop digging. Fill it in. Build over it. Why? What was down there that they needed to cover up? Last year, construction workers in San Francisco broke through into a buried street while working on a new subway line. They found Victorian-era buildings perfectly preserved 25 feet underground, complete storefronts, intact windows, even paper signs still hanging in shop windows. The story made local news for exactly 1 day. Then it disappeared. The construction company was ordered to fill in the section and continue the subway route through a different area. I tried to get more information through the City Historical Society. They had no records, no photographs, nothing, as if the discovery never happened. Try something for me right now. Open Wikipedia. Search for Tartary. What you'll find is a brief disambiguation page. It'll tell you Tartary was a vague historical term for Central Asia. Nothing more. Just a general region Europeans didn't understand very well. Now try to edit that page. Add information about the maps showing Grand Tartary as a defined empire. Add the historical references to Tartarian territories and trade routes. Cite the period documents. Your edit will be removed, usually within hours. The page will be locked from further editing. Your account might get flagged. I've watched this happen 17 times to different researchers trying to add legitimate historical information. The talk page for the Tartary article is fascinating. Editors arguing about what sources are acceptable. Every pre-1900 map showing Tartary, not reliable. Every period text referencing the Tartarian Empire, misinterpretation. Every architectural analysis suggesting advanced construction, conspiracy theory. But modern sources claiming Tartary was just a vague geographical term, those are acceptable. But there's one place they can't control. One piece of evidence so massive they can't demolish it or bury in archives. Antarctica. In 1947, Admiral Richard Byrd led an expedition called Operation High Jump. For 1,700 military personnel, multiple ships, advanced equipment. The official mission? Establish research bases. Map the continent. Byrd's expedition was supposed to last 6 months. They came back after 8 weeks. In his diary, published years after his death, Byrd described finding areas of Antarctica that weren't covered in ice, regions with vegetation, structures that appear to be architectural. He described what he called a land beyond the pole that contradicted everything known about the continent. The military classified most of his findings. What little information was released mentioned only standard mapping data. Then, in 1959, something unprecedented happened. 12 nations signed the Antarctic Treaty, making Antarctica off-limits to military activity, nuclear testing, and most importantly, independent exploration. You can't just go to Antarctica. You need permits, approved research proposals, government authorization, and your movements are restricted to specific zones. Why? Why would 12 competing nations, in the middle of the Cold War, suddenly agree to lock down an entire continent? What's under that ice that they don't want anyone finding? Because if Tartarian civilization was global, if it covered Asia, Europe, and North America, then it would have reached Antarctica too, before the ice, before whatever catastrophe buried everything. And if that evidence is still frozen down there, preserved perfectly under miles of ice, it would prove everything. The advanced architecture, the global civilization, the technology we supposedly didn't have. All of it. That's why Antarctica is forbidden. That's why the treaty has been renewed every single year since 1959, without exception. They're protecting the final proof. You don't need to travel to Antarctica. You don't need classified documents. The evidence is in your city. Right now, I'm going to show you exactly how to find it. First, open Google Maps. Search your city's name plus city hall or courthouse or state capitol. Look at the building. Really look at it. Does it have a dome? Check. Ornamental metal spires or decorative metalwork on the roof? Check. Symmetrical design with a central focal point? Check. Construction date between 1850 and 1920? Check. If you answered yes to all 4, you're looking at a building that doesn't match the official timeline. Now zoom in on the street view. Look at the ground level. Are there windows that appear to be half buried? Basement windows at ground level? Entrance stairs that seem like they should be higher up? That's mudflood evidence. Next step, go to your city's public library. Ask for the local history archive. Most libraries have digitized newspaper collections going back to the 1800s. Search for articles about fires, major demolitions, reconstruction efforts. When I did this in my city, I found something incredible. A newspaper article from 1872 describing a fire that destroyed what they called the Old District. The article mentioned that the buildings destroyed were of unknown construction date and displayed architectural sophistication beyond local capability. Beyond local capability. In a city that supposedly built those structures. The article was 3 paragraphs long, buried in the middle pages. Easy to miss. But it was there. Your city has articles like this too. Stories that don't quite fit the official narrative. Details that contradict the accepted timeline. You just have to look for them. There's a building in Boston called the Old State House, built in 1713, according to the official records. But when you actually examine it, things don't add up. The foundation stones are cut with precision that shouldn't have been possible with early 18th century tools. The symmetry is too perfect. The architectural proportions follow mathematical ratios that weren't supposedly understood in colonial America. And here's the detail nobody explains. The building has a basement level with ventilation shafts that connect to a network of underground tunnels. Tunnels that extend for miles beneath Boston. tunnels that the city claims were built for utilities in the 1800s. But the construction style of the tunnels matches the foundation of the old state house. Same stone, same cutting technique, same age. Either the official date for the building is wrong, or the official explanation for the tunnels is wrong. Both can't be true. This pattern repeats across every major city. Look for buildings with star-shaped foundations. The military calls them star forts. They claim these were defensive structures, but most of them were never used in battle, never positioned in strategically important locations. They're just elaborate geometric structures with no clear military purpose. Unless the purpose wasn't military at all. Look for domed roofs with metal caps and ornamental spires. The architecture textbooks call these decorative elements, purely aesthetic choices. But every one of these domes is positioned at a specific height relative to the building's width. Every spire is made from conductive metals. Every dome has internal structure that resembles the coils Tesla used in his experiments. Decorative or functional components of an energy system we're told never existed. Look for buildings that are now government offices, universities, or were formerly asylums. Then check the construction dates. Almost all of them cluster between 1850 and 1920, right after the mudflood, right after the systematic fires, right after the civilization reset. They didn't build these structures. They repurposed them, filled them with new narratives, new purposes, new histories that erased whatever came before. 2 years ago, I started documenting Tartarian buildings in my area. I posted photos online, started connecting with other researchers. Within 6 months, I had found 12 people in my state doing the same thing. We started sharing discoveries, comparing notes, cross-referencing city records, and we found something remarkable, a pattern of connected underground tunnels linking major buildings across multiple cities. Not modern utilities, old construction, original to the buildings themselves. We mapped them. The tunnels form a network connecting courthouses, universities, government buildings, and former asylum sites. All of them Tartarian architecture. All of them built during the same period. It's like we're looking at the remnants of a unified infrastructure, a system that once connected these cities, a system that got buried and forgotten. Now, there are researchers in every state finding the same patterns, the same buried levels, the same architectural anomalies, the same historical gaps in city records. We're building a database, crowdsourcing evidence, creating a record they can't erase because it's distributed across thousands of people. You can be part of this. When you find evidence in your city, photograph it, document it, share it, tag it with your location, add it to the growing collection of proof. They can delete channels. They can remove Wikipedia entries. They can demolish buildings. But they can't silence everyone. Not when the evidence is everywhere. Not when people start looking with open eyes. This isn't about convincing skeptics. This isn't about winning arguments with mainstream historians. This is about preserving truth, about documenting what remains before they destroy it all, about making sure that when our grandchildren ask what really happened to the old world, we have answers. So here's where we are. You've seen the evidence. The maps that show Tartaria, then watched it disappear. The buildings that shouldn't exist according to the official timeline. The mudflood buried streets underneath every major city. The orphan trains and asylums that erase the witnesses. The systematic destruction continuing right now. You have a choice to make. You can close this video. Go back to accepting the history you were taught. Assume that all these coincidences are just coincidences, that all these patterns mean nothing. Or you can start looking, start questioning, start documenting what you find. Because here's what I know. The truth is bigger than Tartaria, bigger than the mudflood, bigger than missing civilizations and buried cities. The truth is that we've been lied to about our origins, about human capability, about how recently our current civilization actually began. And the people maintaining these lies, they're not ancient conspirators. They're modern institutions, operating right now, actively suppressing evidence, actively controlling narratives. That should concern you, not because of what happened in 1816, but because of what's happening today. If they could erase an empire the size of Tartary from history, what else are they hiding? If they could bury thousands of cities and rewrite the timeline, what else have they changed? And if they're still demolishing evidence, still censoring research, still controlling information, what are they preparing to erase next? I don't have all the answers. Nobody does. The full truth is probably more complex than any single theory can capture. But I know we deserve to see the evidence, to examine it ourselves, to make our own conclusions, not to be told what to think by institutions that have already proven they'll rewrite history when it suits them. So go look at those buildings in your city. Walk those underground tunnels, if they're accessible. Read those old newspapers in the archive. Find the evidence yourself. Then decide what you believe. Because the truth isn't out there in some secret vault waiting to be discovered. The truth is all around us, buried in plain sight, in the foundations of the cities we walk through every day. We just have to be willing to see it. Here's what keeps me awake at night. Not what happened in 1816, not the buildings they destroyed or the history they rewrote. What keeps me awake is knowing they're doing it again. Right now, every city planning meeting that approves demolition of another old-world structure, every Wikipedia edit that removes evidence, every researcher who gets silenced or discredited. The reset didn't end in 1850. It never stopped. They just got better at hiding it. You felt something watching this, didn't you? That pull in your chest. That recognition. Like remembering a dream you'd forgotten. That's not coincidence. You carry the memory of what came before. We all do. Buried deep, suppressed, but still there. And they know it. That's why they keep erasing, keep controlling, keep destroying evidence. Because the moment enough of us remember, the moment enough of us see what's hidden in plain sight, their entire system collapses. So I'll ask you one question. Are you ready to remember? Comment below. Tell me what you found in your city. Share this with someone who needs to see it. Because the truth isn't out there waiting to be discovered. The truth is inside you. It always has been.